We had some challenging times in the recent past, as you all know, and especially when you're in a leadership position, it is quite hard to speak from the heart, create your hope, and find your own reflection. So I'm very happy that I have an expert on exactly that with me today. Hello and welcome straight from the Netherlands, Eksteen de Waal.
Hi, Niels. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for taking the time, and we're getting straight into it. Some people now will sit in their offices thinking, okay, I need to motivate people in times of uncertainty. I cannot do the usual, this is the vision 2021, because no one has a vision for 2021. No one knows how quickly we will resolve the issues and how well or not well it will go. And not only do I have to motivate other people, I also have to motivate myself and stay sane in this situation. So let's start with the first thing. Let's say you are a leader and your own track record. I remember we worked together. You were the inventor of a global learning program, then went for a large corporation in the Netherlands where you were tremendously successful as well. So you have an own leadership track record. What are your recommendations for people who now think, I am not really sure how to make this year a success for me and my team?
I think one of the things I learned in the previous economic crisis in 2008, at that time I was leading a team that was delivering some IT solutions to one of the largest telcos in the Netherlands. And what we saw there is eventually I led about 25, 30 people, depending on and off. And what we saw there was really difficult to keep everybody together, emotionally keep them focused, because everybody was worried and stressed and worried about their jobs and what's going to happen next. And I think the one thing that worked for me is to find a way for people to connect to each other. Some of the research I've done over the last decade or two mainly has to do with how do we deal with things in a crisis. And in a crisis, we have one thing, which is cortisol running through our body at 1,000,000 miles. And unfortunately, that affects something called our executive functions. And our executive functions are things like our ability to plan, to prioritize, to organize, to be creative, to keep in check our emotions. And so what we see in times of crisis, people become very short-tempered. Every single trigger that they have is heightened because of their inability to control it, because there's all this cortisol running through their body. But that also means planning, prioritization, that is impacted as well, and creativity. So any task that you need to organize people, prioritize tasks, and plan stuff is triple impacted. So we see performance dropping through the floor.
Yeah.
Now, if we know and understand that the root cause of this is people's ability to deal with crisis and to deal with the emotions and the hormones in a crisis, we can then look at what kind of things can we do to improve the hormonal balance of people. It's maybe a bit weird way of coming at it, but it seems to be working quite well. So at the moment, I'm advising a few people and I'm helping a few companies with this as well. And what we see is we create resilience by creating connection. Now, in the current situation that we're in, it's very difficult to create connection because I can't just walk up to you, give you a hug or give you a hand or in some way show that I care.
Yeah, social distancing doesn't really work with that, true.
Yeah, this being physically separated is difficult. So the other thing that we find the problematic is we also use our ability to see other people's emotions, cognitive empathy, as a feedback loop. Sorry. And with that feedback loop, we can see what people's reactions are to what we say and what we do. So in a Zoom call, when you're a postage stamp on someone's screen, people can't see your emotions. So that is why we find these calls extremely stressful and strainful, because we can't see our normal feedback loop is not kicking in. So now we need to start looking for ways of doing that. So one of the things we do is we test for something called cognitive empathy and see who has high cognitive empathy. Because those people that have this, I call them super seers, they tend to score above 30 out of 36 in these tests. They have a gene that makes them extremely attuned to what other people are saying and doing and seeing what's behind that. We're bringing those people out in companies to help leadership identify when people need the most help. It's another way of showing that you care. I recently did a TEDx talk about this as well, where we talked about cups of coffee. and how cups of coffee, in essence, is a way of showing that you care, but it's basically sharing something or sharing an experience with someone. So when you're in a leadership position, being there for people, listening to what they have to say, dealing with the discomfort on their behalf and helping them to deal with their cortisol issues, that I think is the most important thing we need to do as leaders at the moment.
Excellent. But now I have just one idea. Let's just think of something. Maybe someone takes all your advice, then they come to a certain conclusion, and then you might run the risk that the senior management team has an amazing idea. They put the idea forward. They are completely convinced of that idea, and that idea doesn't meet really anyone's needs of the rest of the association or the organization. Maybe you know these kind of ideas. Senior management makes up a new plan, mission, vision, value statement, marketing left, right, and center. And then they say, here we are. That is the plan for next year. And basically anyone on tactical and operational level says, this is not going to work. So how do you prevent that you have these ivory tower solutions that does not really work in reality? How do you prevent that you fall for that trap?
I think it's a trap that's very common. Let's start with that. When we're in times of crisis, we're looking for some form of clarity. It usually ties in with an executive function called prioritization. Tell me what I have to do first, because I can't distinguish what is necessary. When people then try and create that clarity, it is as if that clarity becomes a holy thing. If it becomes a panacea, something that's going to solve everything. And that's the problem. It never does. When we want to generate any kind of change in an organization, we can't just have that ivory tower approach, because the resistance that will come from the people, especially in a time of crisis, is huge. Because every single trigger that under normal change circumstances will be triggered will now be heightened. So anything that's forced through usually aren't successful. And in these crisis times, it's even worse. So if people are doing that, shouting from the ivory tower and pushing things through, the resistance they will experience within the organization will make that fail. I cannot stop that from failing. What I can say is, have you listened to what people actually need? Have you created the environment in which creativity can come to the fore? And not just as a process. Because we tend to get so stuck in process. Process, again, in times of crisis, gives us clarity, but it doesn't give us solutions. And the solutions come from the people. One of the most wonderful research studies, I think, in the last 10 years had to do with looking at what problem solving and which kind of teams solve the problems the best. And the first conclusion was that teams with more women solve more problems. And so this added more and more women. Eventually, almost the whole team was just women, and the teams tended to perform better. And then I looked at why that is. And it was, again, what I mentioned earlier, cognitive empathy, the ability to see that somebody's sitting with something. Just being able to see that somebody's either emotionally not dealing with the situation or has a creative idea that people aren't seeing. Bringing those solutions to the table helps an organization to have more options, and then from those options, select the ones that are appropriate for the situation. So ivory tower decisions are very seldom those kind of decisions. It's someone's idea and then run with it. And there's a lot more politics involved than there is actually the care for people involved. And I think we need to change that within the leadership environment. It is hard. It's really hard to ask leaders to not run a process, to not do something in Excel, to not just do another tick box exercise, and to actually help people to understand the environment and grow. A buddy of mine, Hannes Leroy, he's associate professor at the Erasmus University Erasmus University Institute for Management Studies. Recently got my attention on an article that was a metadata analysis on training, leadership training. And basically the short version of it is that feel-good leadership training, stuff that don't make you uncomfortable, these typical tick box exercises we tend to do in companies, they are negatively correlated with leadership growth. Not just do they not have an effect, they have a negative effect. All these things, well, this is what you're good at, stick only with what you're good at, don't work. You have to have a certain amount of discomfort. And in the current crisis, we have discomfort. We really have that level of growth opportunity. So now finding the things that can really help us grow, digging deep, looking at who we really are. What are our triggers? What are the things that make us work well together with others or not? Understanding that and understanding the impact of that on creativity and innovation, I think is at the core of what we need to be focusing at the moment. Understanding our people is much more important than telling them what to do.
Absolutely. And now, of course, we have to take care of another aspect. Let's think of people who they take all your advice and they do it the right way. But you all know that moment when you are in these challenging situations and it is tremendously stressful. And suddenly you hear, oh, it's all doing very well, but we have a record burnout rate on leadership level. So people took care of others, but they didn't properly take care of themselves. What are your tips? How do people realize when should I take care of myself? How should I do it? What are your experiences there and your tips for these people?
I'll give you two things. One is, when we looked way back when I got into management, one of the things that was said is that somebody that manages consultants usually has a 2-year period before they hit burnout.
Yeah.
And project managers also have some of the highest burnout rates in the industry that I was in. The other side of it is, when I was in the military, I saw quite a lot of horrible stuff. And it took me about 8 years to recover out of that, completely recover. And in that process, you learn from a place of PTSD where you start, you learn coping mechanisms and you start understanding more about who you are, what your triggers are, and what are the things that get in your way. And I think once you start on that growth path of knowing who you are, you create an island of calm within yourself and you can find it again once you've learned that. So it doesn't matter if those around you lose their heads. You can be the center of calm. And that usually attracts other people to you because that calm helps them to think clearly as well. So we see in leadership is that the big challenge is when I have to communicate upwards and downwards and to my peers, everybody in middle management takes the majority of that strain. To be able to do that, you need to be centered. You need to be calm within the storm. And that is a skill that you can learn. To make that skill resonate with others is the next step, and to ensure that you have a support team around you that will support you emotionally, if not physically or with tasks only. That is really key. Having somebody you can trust and talk to. But if you can do that with your whole team, it becomes even stronger.
Yeah. I mean, then of course, normally I plan to have this as my last question. Are you okay when I add one more question?
Go for it.
Okay. When you say I need a team that supports me not only physically, but only emotionally, many people have a recruiting process in place where they go by degree, by skill, by university, by network, and we see how that goes. And it doesn't lead to the best results or hiring the best people. How do I choose the right, how do I make the right picks for my team to find the people who not only can fulfill the task, but also support me?
And I shouldn't go commercial on this. Okay. Yes, the reason why
Eksteen de Waal is the answer.
Yeah, but let me give a bit more to that.
Yeah.
The reason why I started my company is because there's so little out there on this. The majority of what people tend to do when they hire, I mean, with all the best intentions in the world, I mean, I don't know any HR people that are horrible and doing something to harm the organization on purpose. That's not the case. Yeah, everybody does the best thing they can with the information they have to hand. So when we hire, we know that one of the tricks that I saw in Scrum teams, and when Scrum and Agile became really a hype in the IT industry, is that the principle behind it was you don't have to hire the best, you have to hire the best team.
Yeah.
And so the people can also learn from each other. So it's things that like looking at those triggers that give people a negative impact. So let's say, for instance, you use a specific word. And I've had a traumatic experience in my past, and that word will always get my goat, and I will always get upset when you use that word. How do I communicate that? How do I talk about that? How do I explain to you that you're basically impacting my performance on a daily basis and quite negatively without sounding like I'm whining? without sounding like I'm emotional. And that's the thing that in business we've taken away. We've taken away people's ability to talk normally about things that impact them. If you're not allowed to be emotional, how else are you going to explain that something is hurting you? And we start with that early in the 20s. So when you look at people in the early 20s, that development phase from, let's say, 18 to 27, where we learn the most about intimate relationships, also about vulnerability and being able to be vulnerable in front of others, that is the time when you're normally an intern in a company. And what do? You fetch the coffee. You get denigrated. You get ignored. And that is where we start creating a culture for the rest of that person's life. They're going to look at business relationships as transactional and not as something that is there to support me. And now, in this time of crisis, that we need that support. We need to connect with each other. We need to do that to stay resilient. We don't have it. I think we need to go to the drawing board and say, what do we need to make sure that whomever we recruit into the company, be they an intern or a senior, has the right willingness to talk about those things that matter most? Can they have a conversation, and can they be vulnerable? And I think that's one of the things that we need to check for, test for, and then manage for.
Excellent. This is great advice. Of course, I am going to put your contact details in the show notes of this podcast so people can get straight in contact with you when they want to. And I can only highly recommend to get in contact with you, because I know you for a very long time. I know that you are too modest to say that. And I hope you reference it, but I will do so now. I remember how we worked together for a global training company. And I'm not going to manage, I'm not going to name that manager, but basically they had an idea, and I think they put you in a room saying, here's a TV, here are VCR cassettes, make it work. And out of that developed a global paradigm change for a whole corporate-wide learning system sold worldwide now. So maybe remember that time. So I
do remember it. It was quite stressful, creating something to work with people, that was so devoid of human connection.
Yeah. Exactly. So I know that you not only speak from your own experience, but also from your own expertise. So you're not someone who read about that in a book. You lived it by yourself with your own successful track record. So at the end of this podcast, there's only one thing for me left to say. Eksteen, thank you very much for your time.
And thank you for having me, Niels. It was great talking to you again.